So as you should be aware, the mock exam starts with a 4-mark question, and it's a comprehension question. So you have to explain what you can learn, and then you have to try and make an inference as well. To get the full marks, you need to make an inference, and we should all know that's what's suggested by the source. And the source was a picture of a Hitler Youth gathering. So for this question, for 4 marks, you have to explain what you can learn, as I say, and make an inference what's suggested by the source. Most of you did this question quite well. Some of you wrote too much, and I think it's a temptation to do that, but it's only worth 4 marks, so you should only do those things and then move on. And as I say, I think some of you took too long, wrote too much, and maybe you could have saved yourself a bit of time by writing a little bit less. So here's a question from Ellie. Ellie's answer, to look at her answer. So the question was, what can you learn from source A about the Hitler Youth? And as I say, you have to make an inference and explain what you can learn. So Ellie does that quite well. So the answer says, from source A you can learn that the boys that were part of the Hitler Youth wore matching uniforms. So it's clearly explaining what you can learn from the source. And then it goes on, you can also see from the source that girls were not part of the Hitler Youth. So the answer is, as I say, it's clearly, if I underline the key sections, it's clearly explaining what you can learn from the source. And the answer goes on to make a clear inference, in my opinion, and that would get you 4 marks. So it says, another thing you can learn from the source is that the boys were all treated equally as they all sat around the table together. This also shows how they might have operated as a team. So I think there's a clear inference being made there. So Ellie's got 4 marks, and I don't think, as this answer shows, you don't need to write pages and pages. You just need to write a small little answer. As I say, it's only worth 4 marks, and then move on. And some of you wrote too much and wasted time there, I think. So the next question you had to do was a 9-mark question, and you get a choice. The question asks, or says, choose one of the 2 things down there mentioned and explain how it helped Hitler increase his power. So the 2 you could choose from are the Reichstag fire and the Enabling Act. Some students sometimes will use both of these things. They talk about the Reichstag fire and the Enabling Act, and none of you made that mistake, so you only needed to choose one. So the one that I'm going to look at is the one on the Reichstag fire. So it's a 9-mark question. You shouldn't spend too long on this question. Some of you did, I think. Only need to write 2 paragraphs, roughly, and it shouldn't be taking you more than about 10 minutes maximum, I don't think. So we'll have a look at an answer. So we've got Tom's answer here. So Tom chose the Reichstag fire, and he's written two paragraphs here about how it helped Hitler increase his power, or how it helped the Nazis increase their power. So just go through this answer. It says the Reichstag fire in 1933 helped Hitler increase his power because it gave him an excuse to blame his opposition. The Nazis blamed the communists for the Reichstag fire, which caused a lot of distrust, I think that might be meant to say, and a drop in votes for the communists. So the first paragraph's clearly focusing on how the Reichstag fire helped Hitler increase his power by blaming his enemies for the fire and sort of taking them out of the game, so to speak. It's a little bit short, I think, this paragraph. It could be a bit more detailed, could be a bit more analysis in there, but not bad at all. In the second paragraph, I think it's good. Tom focuses on the emergency decree which was passed after the Reichstag fire. So the Nazis and Hitler used the Reichstag fire as an excuse to really crack down on the opposition and take steps to start dismantling the Weimar democracy, really. So Tom says also the emergency decree was passed, which gave Hitler almost full control over Germany. Hitler effectively became dictator. So I think that's a really good point about the emergency decree and the powers it gave Hitler and how it helped him destroy democracy. The emergency decree was where police could search anybody's house without a warrant. Also, people could be put in prison without going through a trial. So Tom's showing that he clearly knows about the emergency decree. Again, there are other things that the emergency decree did, which I think Tom doesn't mention, such as newspapers were banned, meetings weren't allowed, political meetings and so on. So it could be more detailed, but I think overall this is a good answer, In the first paragraph, Tom focuses on how the Nazis blame the communists, and in the second paragraph, he looks at the the emergency decree, and how Hitler used this in the aftermath of the fire. He used the fire as an excuse to pass this emergency decree, which cracked down on democracy and really helped him increase his power, and shows why the Reichstag fire was so important. So I think this is a good answer. I'll give it a little tick. So this is the 12-mark question. So you had a choice. They were both about girls or women, really, and the Nazi policies towards them. It's a 12-mark question. So I've been expecting you to write roughly about 3 paragraphs and make sure you have a conclusion. And you should be spending a little bit longer than a 9-mark question. There's no need for an introduction. As I say, it should be a bit more detailed than a 9-mark question, I think. You're given by the exam board, this will be the same in the exam when you take it, you're given some bullet points, but you obviously be expected, your answer won't really get out of level 1 if you don't expand upon these and include your own knowledge, really. So there was a choice. So the first question we'll look at is this one: in what ways did the Nazi government prepare girls for their future roles? And it talks about in the bullet points, many girls joined the League of German Maidens, the BDM. In PE lessons, girls were taught the importance of being healthy, and it talks about the number of female university students falling from 150,000 to 50,000. So we'll have a look at an answer to this question. Okay, so the answer we've got here to the 12-mark question, in what ways did Nazi government prepare girls for their future roles? As I said, it's a 12-mark question, so we'll be expecting you to write a couple of paragraphs and a conclusion, 3 paragraphs. So this is Matt's answer. So I'll go through this with you. It says the Nazi government prepared girls for looking after children and cooking. Women in Nazi Germany were told to follow the 3 Ks, which stood for kitchen, church, children. So just by that little section there, you can see that Matt clearly knows what he's talking about. It's not mentioned, the 3 Ks aren't mentioned that Matt talks about by the bullet points, so he's clearly using his own knowledge there. And then there's the analysis. This shows that girls were prepared for being the ideal mother by spending their lives cooking for their children and husbands, taking their children to church, and nurturing their children where appropriate. In the next paragraph, it talks about the Nazi government prepared girls for a life devoted to Hitler. Many girls aged 14 to 18 joined the League of German Mothers, the BDM. So Matt's used a bit of a bullet point there, but he goes on to expand upon that using his own knowledge. This showed that they believed in and supported Nazi ideas. The BDM would have been taught total Nazi ideas which would have influenced how they were going to live their lives. So Matt's clearly expanding on the bullet point there. They would have grown up believing that Hitler was their god and would have passed these ideas on to their children. This showed that the Nazis were influencing multiple generations, which is a good point. Next paragraph, the Nazi government didn't prepare girls for being educated and becoming professionals. Between 1933 and 38, female university students fell from 150,000 to 50,000. So again, using a bit of a bullet point there, but expanding on it. This showed that women were not bothering to become educated because they would have been influenced into thinking that they should have spent their lives at home being a good mother and wife. So there's some clear analysis there as well, if I just underline that bit. And then we'll move on to the next section. So just to finish off in conclusion, Matt's got a clear conclusion, as I say. Did you have a conclusion to your answer? You need a conclusion, you need to clearly answer the question in your conclusion. I like the way that Matt said the most important idea. I think the most important idea which the Nazis had was to stop women from being educated, because there is clear evidence that university became a lot less popular with women, and because of Hitler's idea of superiority, he would have believed that it should be the men who became educated and professional workers. So again, it's not a bad answer there from Matt. I think there's things he could have talked about more, perhaps on the subjects girls studied, such as domestic science. I think that would have been a good point to make that Matt doesn't make. Also, something else which I think could have been mentioned, perhaps, is some of the activities girls did at school, such as dance and things like that, preparing them for motherhood as well. So always room for a little more, but it's a good answer. nonetheless. So the other question you could do, and the other 12-mark question, was in what ways did the lives of women change in Nazi Germany in the years 33 to 39? So again, just like the previous question, you should be spending about 12-15 minutes on this sort of question. No introduction, but a clear conclusion needed, and perhaps 3 paragraphs as well. And there's some bullet points here which you can use as well, but again, you won't get out if you just repeat those bullet points, or if you just mention them and then develop them a little. You're going to be in level 1 or 2. You need to include your own knowledge. So it talks about 1933 was the law for the encouragement of marriage, encouraging people to get married. There were 1,000 Reichsmark loans to couples getting married. It talks about domestic science was taught to girls in schools, and it talks in 1936, it mentions there was a shortage of workers in Germany. So it's giving you some real pointers, but there's some good points that you could make which aren't mentioned by the bullet points. It doesn't talk about how in 1933 and up to 1933 in Weimar Germany, women were amongst the freest in the world, really, in terms of their equality. Women were free to become professionals, jobs like judges, lawyers, politicians. They went out and socialised and smoked and did all these sorts of things. And so you could talk about that, really, and how that way of life was taken away from women, really, by the Nazis, and they were very much encouraged to stay at home, to have children, and all of these sorts of things. They were encouraged to get married by, as I say, linking to this bullet point of 1,000 Reichsmark loans. And they were encouraged to have children by medals as well, weren't they? So I think they're all very good, important points. One of the things I would say is that the bullet point does kind of allude to this, is that there were labour shortages from 1936, and definitely from 1937 onwards. These were caused by conscription, and the fact that there just weren't enough men available to do the jobs, so they were all off in the army training and doing all these other sorts of things. So the Nazis' policy really was disrupted by this, and they could no longer encourage women to stay at home. So you could really develop on that bullet point and talk about the fact that, you know, women were made to go back to work, but the sort of work they were doing was very much manual labour. It was women did a duty year from 1937, I believe. Women worked in factories, making armaments, bombs, and so on. But they didn't go back to their previous lifestyle of accessing professional jobs in that way. Although there are 1 or 2 examples of women being very high up in the Nazi party, such as the women's leader, or the leader of the BDM, Gertrude Scholz-Klink. So we'll have a look at this answer. So the answer I've got here to look at is Lucy Price's answer. So just the questions there. In what ways did the lives of women change in Nazi Germany in the years 1933 to 39? So you've got to be careful to stay within that time period. So Lucy starts off at, no introduction, which is great. In 1933, women's lives changed a lot in Germany. This is because Hitler had a narrow view on what he wanted them to dress like, act like, their role in the house. For example, in Weimar Germany, women were allowed and encouraged to pursue any career path desired, but under Nazi rules, they had to leave their jobs. I think that perhaps should say. So clearly, as I mentioned when I was discussing the question, Lucy's showing that she knows what the question's all about. She's showing her own knowledge by talking about how free women were in Nazi Germany. No matter what it was like, perhaps, and stay at home to raise children and care for the home. The women did not like this, as they were being told what to be like and had no freedom of expression. So again, Lucy's clearly making that link to Weimar Germany and how free women were. Although there is a lot of evidence, I would disagree with that comment, that actually women did go and get married and stay at home, and there wasn't actually a lot of problems with this. Women didn't actually mind this. In 1933, a new law was passed for the encouragement of marriage, so that's from the bullet point. This basically meant it was in their best interest to wed, as they would receive a marriage loan from the Nazis for them to pay back over time. So it develops that bullet point. Even the lives of young women changed. For example, they were taught domestic science in schools, as well as eugenics. This was all to prepare them for motherhood and to find the perfect husband. So again, using the own knowledge there. Next paragraph, between 33 and 38, the number of university students fell. This shows they were being encouraged to leave school, get married and have children as soon as possible. Also, the girls would have wanted not to bother going to university as they were not allowed to work under Nazi rule. So again, I think that's from the bullet point, but it's clearly being developed. In the next paragraph, it says in PE lessons, girls were taught the importance of being healthy. This is because healthy women can have healthier, stronger babies without too much going wrong. Many of the girls aged 14 to 18 joined the League of German Maidens as they viewed it as unfair. The boys could join the Hitler Youth, but there was nothing for the girls to get taught about Nazis and Germany. In 1936, there was a shortage of workers in Germany, as so many men had left to join the military. This meant that women were needed to go back to work. The Nazi women did not like this, as they could not resume the career they had had before the Nazis, but instead they had to work in factories. So again, Lucy, very good that she makes that link that actually women were made to go back to work. The Nazis had to change their policies. I don't think it's a perfect answer. I think it's a good answer, but there doesn't seem to be a clear conclusion there. So I think that's one way that Lucy could develop that, perhaps. I think that it could perhaps be made clearer. Some of the other things that how really, I suppose, the women's lives changed in terms of how the Nazis wanted them to appear, not to smoke, not to wear makeup, to be very traditional. Lucy doesn't mention the medals that women got for having children, I don't think, so that's another way perhaps they can improve. But a clear conclusion is definitely needed at the end, where I'm putting these little points there. So once you've done your comprehension question, you made your inference, you've done your 9-mark question, 2 paragraphs, ideally. You've completed the 12-mark question, where you've got maybe 3 paragraphs and a conclusion, perhaps, and it's taken you 15 minutes or so, roughly. You're on to your final section, question 5 or 6. This is worth quite a lot of marks, and one of the problems that some of you had is you did the first few questions really well, and you got some good marks there, but ran out of time when you came to either question 5 or 6. And if you just look at the marks available, the part A is worth 9 marks, it's another 9-mark question, and the B is worth 16. So, that's 25 marks. If I use my excellent math skills, it's 25 marks there, isn't it? And if you're running out of time and you don't answer those questions sufficiently, you're going to lose a significant proportion of the marks available, okay? So it's very important. So the 5A question was described why the Munich Putsch failed in 1923. So be expecting you to write ideally 2 paragraphs for that. And you could talk about some of the reasons why it failed, or just 2 reasons in 2 separate paragraphs. And then the B question is more of an essay question, isn't it? We'd expect you to write a proper essay there and really go to town if you can, writing lots down for that. So the B question was, the Weimar Republic successfully recovered from its early problems in the years 1924 to 28. Do you agree? Explain your answer. So it's looking for you really to look at the 2 different viewpoints. The one argument that Weimar wasn't successfully recovered, it didn't successfully recover. If you like, it was doomed from the start. But also the argument that actually Weimar recovered to a significant extent, and it could have actually continued. So it gives you some bullet points as well that are obviously going to help you out. But again, if you only use those bullet points, if you don't use any of your own knowledge, you're not going to get very far. You're only going to get level 1 or 2. And you also need to try and make sure you're thinking about your literacy skills with these answers as well, because there's spelling and grammar marks available. Not many, maximum of 3. But there's some of you making silly errors in your spelling, for example. A lot is 2 separate words. You're using your capital letters as well. Make sure you're doing that. So there's just a few little tips there. Make sure you're spelling Nazi correctly and all the sort of key words if you can. So we'll look at the answers to question 5. Not many students in my class did question 5. There's only 1 or 2 of you, but we'll still go for it. Okay, so we'll look at Ashley's answer to 5A. Describe why the Munich Putsch failed in 1923. So you shouldn't be writing any introductions or anything like that. you know, it can be a bit misleading. It doesn't look like Ashley's written a huge amount, but when it's typed up, it does make it look shorter than perhaps it actually is. In 1923, an event happened called the Munich Putsch. Some people believe that it was a success because it gave Hitler a national speaking platform due to all the journalists. However, to the rest of the people, they believed it was a failure. Although Hitler became Chancellor, he did not have an easy fight getting there. So that's Ashley's first paragraph. I think that it's not bad at all, but I would say it says some people believe that it was a success because it gave Hitler a national speaking platform due to all the journalists. However, the rest of the people, they believed it was a failure, and I think perhaps that could be more focused. You know, the question, it needs you to go straight in and say, look, why was it a failure? What was the first reason? You know, what was the second reason? So in the second paragraph, Ashley says the Munich Putsch was a march that he had organised. He planned for it to take a high incline within the Weimar Republic. So I think the expression high incline, I'm not too sure what Ashley's perhaps trying to get at there. But to move on, it says, however, it couldn't have got worse. Not only did it not succeed, but 16 men that defended Hitler were killed and others injured, including Hitler himself. So perhaps Ashley's alluding to the fact there that it was badly organised. That's a good point. She talks about he was shot in the arm, and as he fell, his followers defended him and lost their own lives. After that, Hitler was put on trial and found guilty, and although he only served 9 months, a lot of his hard work had been forgotten. So I think Ashley makes some good points there, but I think the focus is on why the Munich Putsch failed, and I don't think this answer, perhaps, although it's got some really good information in it, it doesn't focus enough on that. So I think Ashley can improve her answer a little bit there, despite the fact it's a good answer. You know, you perhaps could do a paragraph where you spoke about, look, this is one reason why it failed, was because of, you know, poor leadership or poor organisation perhaps. In another paragraph, you could talk about the fact that, you know, there just wasn't the support available. That perhaps is another reason why it failed. So we'll move on from there. The next answer was 5b. The Weimar Republic successfully recovered from its early problems in the years 1924 to 28. Do you agree? You know, it says, do you agree? So you need to make sure you're explaining your viewpoint. As I've said to you, there's really, you need to identify the Weimar Republic successfully recovered from its problems, and it's 1924 to 28. When you read the question, try and pick out the key points. Did the Weimar Republic recover, or didn't it? That's basically what this is all about, this question. So I've got Evan's answer here, and I think Evan has a good go here. In this essay, I will try and put across different views on if the Weimar Republic recovered from its early problems. So I think by doing that, if I underline that, you know, Evan's clearly demonstrating that he understands what the question is about. You know, these two different views. He says, I agree with this statement because the Weimar Republic went into the Golden Ages and was the place to be of its time. So that's a really good point. I don't think it's mentioned by the bullet points, talking about how Weimar society flourished in the 1920s. Germany was a fashionable place to be, with cabaret, with music, and all this sort of thing. So I think that's a really good example of how Weimar Germany recovered successfully. My criticism would be that Evan's only really written a sentence about that, and he could really expand on that by talking about, you know, the cabaret, the jazz, how this was a sign of society recovering from you know, the World War I and so on. In the next section, Evan talks about, on the other hand, their economy relied on loans from the US, the Dawes Plan, and if they stopped coming, the German economy died. In this way, the economy was not stable, so the Weimar government did not recover. So again, clearly making a point there that, you know, there's two viewpoints here. The Golden Ages are an example of the Weimar Republic recovering. The economic reliance on America is an example that actually it was not really, the economic recovery was not real, if you like, and you know, once the Americans withdrew the loans, if they ever had any problems, which we all know in 1929 they did, the German economy was really going to suffer. So in the next section it says, although Germany was still a great nation which could recover, this is proved by them joining the League of Nations. So another really good point, you know, Germany did recover, And they, they didn't like the fact they weren't allowed an army. They didn't like the fact that they weren't treated as a great nation, if you like, by being admitted to things like the League of Nations. So when they were, this showed that they were ultimately recovering, I think. So it's another really good point made by Evan. Moving on, another indicator that the Weimar government recovered. So that's a really good start to that paragraph. I might have said try and put in the word successfully recovered. If you put that in there, successfully recovered, was the low amount of extremist right-wing groups in Parliament. When bad times happened, the people weren't radicalised, so voted for extreme or left-wing groups. So I think the point Evan's making there is that there was less support for radical groups because people were content. People were relatively content. The economy was doing better, and so on. When the German people had unemployment, they didn't have any money, they'd lost all their savings, the middle classes, then they began to vote for radical groups. I think where this paragraph perhaps falls down a little is that there were radical groups in Parliament, there were radicals in the Reichstag, so to speak. But I think the point Evan's making about the amount of support they had is perhaps a good one. And then Evan puts a conclusion. In conclusion, the economy of Weimar Germany was unstable and recovered, but most other aspects have recovered from the early years. So I think it's a good effort. I think there's some points that Evan could do to improve, referring to the question more. I think there's some evidence that is missing as well. The Treaty of Locarno is more evidence that Germany recovered. There was agreement reached on Germany's borders, which made Germany more secure. There was agreement on reparations and how much Germany was going to have to pay back, which is another good point, I think, that Evan could have made. Evan doesn't mention Gustav Stresemann and how he ended passive resistance, and how he really helped Germany recover by creating a new currency, and really getting Germany back on its feet in that way. So I think that's another point that perhaps could have been made. And it shows how much Germany was recovering. Again, I think there are some other issues that Evan could have mentioned about why perhaps Germany wasn't successfully recovering. Many Germans profoundly disliked the Weimar government. They saw them as traitors for signing World War I, the peace treaty. There were the structural problems with the political system as well, if you like. Proportional representation meant that there were lots of coalition governments. Agreement couldn't be reached. I think that's another thing that could be perhaps mentioned, and there were just government after government, a succession of governments. And Article 48 perhaps could be mentioned as well, and how this could be abused at any time by the president, and democracy could be suspended. And also things like the Treaty of Versailles. I think Evan could have perhaps mentioned that, and how many Germans hated the fact that Germany didn't have an army, and so on. So there's a lot more that Evan could have put in, and I think perhaps Evan, the time, perhaps was running a bit short on time, but nevertheless, so I like his answer. It's a good effort overall. So most of you did the 6A question, which is what I've got here in front of us now. 6A and B, sorry. So 6A was a 9 mark and 6B was the 16, wasn't it? So again, you've got to get onto this question with good time remaining. If you don't, you're not going to be able to write a detailed enough answer, and you're going to lose a lot of points. So it's really important. So in the A question, describe the ways in which hyperinflation affected Germany in 1923. We're expecting you to write 2 paragraphs. Really, you don't need an introduction. It's just like the previous 9-mark question you did, really, isn't it? For the B question, the Munich beer hall putsch was a total failure for the Nazi Party. Do you agree? So again, there's this viewpoint. The Munich putsch was a total failure. Was it or wasn't it? That's basically what it's asking you, and you need to, go through that process of deconstructing the question. And I thought a lot of you did that really well. They give you some bullet points again and again, as I've mentioned previously. If you just rely on those, your answer's not going to get out of level 1 or 2, and you need to be careful about your spellings and your grammar and all those sorts of things if you can, because you can pick up a couple of extra marks there as well if your spelling and grammar are good. So watch out for your capital letters at a minimum. Some of you, I noticed, did that. There were no real common spelling errors like that, but again, a lot was one word that a lot of you were misspelling. It's 2 words, not 1. So we'll go through and we'll have a little look at these 2 questions. And as I say to you, the B question, we'd be expecting you to do an extended essay. And just to prove I'm not making it up, it does say on the exam paper, which I've drawn a very neat square around. Literacy marks will be awarded, so do try. Obviously, do your best and think about, if you can, spelling correctly. So we'll have a look at an answer now. So I think I might have forgotten whose answer this is. I think it's Lucy Daniels. So I'll just go through this answer. I think they're both from her. So the 9 question was, describe the ways in which hyperinflation affected Germany in 1923. So we'll read through this answer. Hyperinflation was when the Weimar Republic government decided it was best to print more money. After World War I, Germany was blamed by all the other countries and had to sign the Treaty of Versailles. This meant they had to pay money to all the other countries for the damage. This left Germany bankrupt, and that meant the economy slowed down, and many thousands lost their jobs. So, clearly explaining, I'm not underlining it very well, but it's clearly explaining how Germany was affected. Bankruptcies, economy slowing down, losing of jobs, okay? Many factories and shops shut down and ran out of everything. The Weimar Republic decided it was best to print more money, clearly showing how hyperinflation affected Germany. By doing this, the value of money went down. Instead of paying 200 for a loaf of bread, you'd be paying 209,000 for a loaf of bread. I'm not quite sure where that statistic came from, but it is ultimately correct that prices increased hugely, and it's showing how hyperinflation affected Germany. The situation meant prices would just go up and up by the day. It's a bit like these days, isn't it? It was so bad that shopkeepers would have to wait till the middle of the day to tell employees when and where they would be paid. You know, so Lucy's clearly showing she knows what she's talking about here. She's clearly showing how a hyperinflation affected German citizens. So that's really good. Since the value of money went up, the people who had savings now didn't, because all the savings went down in value. This meant nobody had any money saved and sent Germany into an economic decline. So again, it's a good answer, and Lucy's clearly showing how hyperinflation affected Germany in her answer. My criticism, or my points for improvement, perhaps I should say, I'll be a bit more positive. Perhaps the answer should be in paragraphs. There could be 2 separate paragraphs, and I think Lucy mentions lots of little ways in which hyperinflation affected Germany, and I would say to make your answer more focused, choose 2 of those ways and write a paragraph about each of them instead of writing loads in one big paragraph. For example, you could write 1 paragraph about how hyperinflation affected German citizens in terms of they didn't have any money, they went bankrupt, they lost their jobs, and so on. And then perhaps you could talk about in another paragraph how a hyperinflation affected Germany in terms of the economy, I guess you could say, in that way. You know, the value of money and printing more money and so on and so forth. So perhaps that's a way to improve that answer. Moving on to the B section, the Munich Beer Hall putsch was a total failure for the Nazi Party. Do you agree? So you want to try and watch your spellings, as I say, because there are extra marks available for that. We're looking for you to do a balanced answer. Do you agree? Your essay should be about you presenting the 2 different viewpoints. Why was the Munich putsch a failure? Why could it be suggested it was a total failure? On the other view, the other perspective, the other interpretation, so to speak, why wasn't it a total failure? You know, what are the views for what is the evidence to suggest that it wasn't a total failure? And then we're expecting you, in your conclusion, to make your judgment. Do you think it was a total failure? Okay. Show your point of view. Show your argument in answering that question. To be honest, lots of you did do that, which was really good. So we'll have a look through Lucy's answer here. The Nazis planned to take over Munich on the 9th of November 1923. This was called the Munich Putsch. Hitler was supposed to be supported by 2 politicians, Kahr and another politician. So that's good that Lucy can remember that. Kahr. I'm not sure who the other politician is that Lucy's referring to, but obviously that's really good. When they backed out of Hitler's deal for them to help and take over Munich, Hitler and 3,000 Nazis marched into a beer hall where they were giving one of their speeches to other politicians and demanded their support with the men at gunpoint. So it does start off a little bit as telling the story, really, so I think you need to be careful about that, and perhaps think, well, you know, could I miss that bit out? Do I really need that bit in my essay? What is good? Lucy explains what she's going to say in her essay. I'll be talking about whether the Munich Putsch was a failure or not. So Lucy's clearly identifying there that she knows what the question's all about. You know, was it a failure or wasn't it? The Nazis did then march into Munich, where they were stopped by the police, who then regained control. Hitler was later arrested. One reason why the Munich Putsch was not a failure, so really good, starts the paragraph off with the point, linked to the question, as I like to say, you know, clearly referencing the question, is because it gave Hitler to speak from. In his trial, Hitler took full responsibility for the Munich Putsch. This showed great leadership and devotion to the rest of Germany, and Hitler was seen as a hero. So Lucy's clearly talking about how Hitler got a positive sort of notoriety and became quite famous for his charisma, his speaking abilities after the Munich Putsch, and why it wasn't a total failure. In his trial, Hitler was able to get across Nazi ideas and show people that himself and the Nazis wanted to make Germany great again. So again, it's clearly showing Lucy's knowledge, how the Nazi ideas became famous, and the Nazis and Hitler became famous, all reasons why the Putsch wasn't a total failure. The judges of his trial admired Hitler and liked the things he stood for. This resulted in Hitler only being sentenced to jail for 9 months. All evidence to support the view that the Munich Putsch wasn't a total failure. When Hitler was put in prison, the Nazi Party did not have a leader and fell apart. Good point. Again, I would ideally like Lucy to do what she did with this first paragraph, or second paragraph I should say, and link to the question. One reason why the Munich Putsch was not a total failure, or was a total failure perhaps in this incident, was because the Nazi Party fell apart. They didn't have a leader, and Hitler was the main man really. And once he was in prison, that was you know, the Nazis started to argue with each other, and the party disintegrated to a certain extent. This means the Munich Putsch, I'm not sure if that's my typing error or Lucy's, probably not my fault, I don't make many mistakes. This means the Munich Putsch was a failure because with the leader in jail, it meant that the Nazi Party was no longer in charge. While Hitler was in prison, he resigned from the party and spent his time writing his book Mein Kampf. This was a positive outcome of the Munich Putsch. As he had not been arrested, he would not have been able to write his book. So I think, very good point again, it gave Hitler the chance to sit in prison. He was treated really well, and he wrote his book Mein Kampf in prison. So that's another really good point. But this paragraph actually is a little confused, because it starts off by talking about why he was a failure, because he was in jail, and then it goes on to talk about really a reason why the Putsch was a success, because he wrote Mein Kampf. So perhaps you could, you know, this needs to be organised a little bit better, that paragraph. Another reason why the Munich Putsch was a failure was the loss of Nazi soldiers. So that's another really good point. This time, unlike the previous paragraph, Lucy's making it clear, she's linking to the question again. Many of the Nazis were killed and injured, and Hitler was uninjured too. Good own knowledge there, isn't it? Lucy clearly knows what she's talking about. This was a bad sacrifice for the loss of life. I'm not too sure about that sentence. But without the Munich Putsch, Hitler would not have been at his trial, and his face would have been all over the newspapers so all the German people could see him. So again, talking about how it made him famous. Hitler was then released from prison, and the party was relaunched in 1925. In prison, Hitler realised the only way he could get to power was legally. And I'm really glad, you know, it's quite sad, but, you know, I'm really glad that, you know, a lot of you mentioned that. The fact that the really important point about the Munich Putsch was that it was an indicator to Hitler that I'm not going to get into power if I'm, you know, busting into beer halls in the middle of the night, making speeches, when people are making speeches, and trying to get power that way through the barrel of a gun, so to speak. What Hitler realised is that if he wanted to get power, he needed to put his gun down and use the ballot box. He needed to get people to vote for him. It's too dangerous, and more importantly, you end up in prison trying to seize power like that. So he realised that he needed to seize power in a legal way, and I'm really glad that a lot of you said that in your answers, and Lucy said that as well. So this is another success that came out of the Munich Putsch. If Hitler hadn't realised this, he would not have seen the way to power was to be elected. So that's excellent analysis, and it's an excellent point. Hitler relaunched the Nazi Party and changed his strategies in order to gain power. And then Lucy goes on to put in a conclusion. Again, that's really good. A nice detailed conclusion here, which is what we're looking for. And Lucy clearly makes a judgment. In conclusion, the Munich Putsch was a success. Even though it was a failure, as they did not take over Munich, the overall outcome was a success. She's clearly making a judgment, so that's really good. Hitler was given a platform to speak from and seen all over Germany as a responsible, confident leader. Without the Munich Putsch, Hitler would not have realised the way to power was legally and not written Mein Kampf. Even though Hitler went to jail, his outcome of the Munich Putsch was more a success than a failure. Clearly making the judgment there. It gave Hitler the ability to show everyone he was serious about being a leader, and the Munich Putsch was the start of what was to come from Hitler, and without it, he would not have been successful. So I'm really pleased with that. Perhaps to improve, you could put a most important reason in there, an MR, if I can write that. A most important reason could go in there, and I think that if you're looking for an A star, you'd certainly be perhaps looking for some of these paragraphs to be better organised, like this one that I alluded to. So we'll put an X through that paragraph. And you need to organise your paragraphs in order of importance. You know, you need to say things like, well, look, one reason why the Munich Putsch was a failure was because of this. This is the most important reason why it was a failure, you know. In your next paragraph, the second most important reason why it was a failure. The third most important reason, and organise your evidence in terms of its importance and significance as well. And perhaps that's something I could have mentioned throughout. If you can organise it in terms of your paragraphs in order of importance and the evidence in terms of that, most importantly in your first paragraph, second most important thing, and then that's going to get you, you know, a higher mark as well, because it shows you thinking in that way, higher order skill of thinking, if you like, that you can prioritise your evidence and think about the significance and the importance of evidence in that way. So hopefully what I think you need to do is you need to think about the points I've made, look at your answers, make sure you've self-assessed your answers, make sure you've read my comments that I've written and given you, or typed that I've given you. Get someone else to peer assess your essay, self-assess it using those forms that I've given you, and really reflect on your progress. Really, are you on target? Have you got your target grade? If you haven't, why haven't you? You know, did you revise? If you didn't, why didn't you? If you want to do your best, we're all capable in our class of doing really well. And sometimes I think, you know, we need to make sure we're focused on how to improve a little bit more, aren't we? So anyway, we'll stop there.